is that under Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, technically no regulatory offense or drug offense has any force of law of criminal under the criminal common law, which is the only legitimate law in the United States, because there's no injury and no intent to injure another person. And of course, the prosecutors will claim all of society is harmed, but when they do that, they're essentially transitioning from a constitutional argument into a Marxist argument, and that's something that libertarians have to be better at fighting and recognizing in court battles. And of course, bar licensed attorneys will never pursue that line of argument, because that would cast aspersions on the bar licensing itself. So that's another place where America went off the tracks, and where we need libertarian political candidates who understand these concepts to educate the general public. And I'm not suggesting just an educational campaign, because once they have the power of office, they are considered even more legitimate by the people who elected them, and those people, when they serve as jury members, then become far more likely to vote not guilty when they're serving on juries. And an elected politician can do what Ron Paul did and vote no on everything. They can, be a no vote. He was called Dr. No. Well, he was in Congress, and that's fine. The existing status quo is not legitimized by no votes on all the evil, tyrannical stuff. So, and Ron Paul does actually have a video online that anyone can watch called Power to the Jury, where he actually does explain all these ideas, and he explained them when he was running as a libertarian for like the couple of years that he wasn't elected to Congress after 1988. He was out of Congress for a couple of years, and then he went back and got reelected to Congress. I wish he would have done more in terms of promoting jury nullification of law to the people in his district especially. And I wish he would have gone to more court cases and sat as an expert witness for defendants. That was something that probably a lot of defendants could have done. A lot of defense attorneys could have done that, but they failed to exploit it. And I also want to talk about historically in the United States how a lot of anarchist libertarians don't realize that the fugitive slave law was successfully resisted in the North by libertarian politicians who would have considered themselves classical liberals or maybe anarchists, but they still participated in elections. And even Lysander Spooner, his mentors, his bosses at the law firm that hired him, that recognized that he was an outstanding legal mind and hired him, he pointed out that the corrupted government is not legitimate, but that theoretically an uncorrupted government could be legitimate. He pointed out that whether the Constitution was legitimate or not, it had failed to prevent the government from becoming corrupted, and therefore no one was obligated to obey the dictates of a corrupted government. But that's the same point Henry David Thoreau made, and he wasn't an anarchist either. He, expressly said, he was not a no-government man, meaning not an anarchist. People don't take anarchists seriously, and the status quo especially caricatures non-voting anarchists as uncaring and not willing to participate, and not willing to expend the minimal effort necessary to go to a polling place and vote. Because principled non-voting can be portrayed that way as just unprincipled laziness, because it can always be easily caricatured that way, it makes sense to abandon that as a legitimate strategic position, because it doesn't help us build a bigger network, and it doesn't help us achieve any goal that we want to achieve. And all of our goals can be helped by building a bigger network of sympathizers. And the only way that you can build a bigger network of sympathizers is by convincing people that you're serious and participating. And they view currently, rightly or wrongly, participation as voting. So we should vote, and we should also say, in addition to voting, we are voting, but the real chance that you have to make a difference is by sitting on a jury. Because that's the way that you can make a difference tomorrow. If you get a jury summons in the mail tomorrow, and you go, and they say the judge and prosecutor team up, and they try to kick you off because you're a libertarian, they say, could you send someone to jail for a nonviolent marijuana offense in accordance with Illinois law? or whatever state you're in. Say yes, Your Honor. Say yes, you could. And you wouldn't even technically be lying, because you could if you were stupid, or if there was injury and intent to injure in the case, which there isn't, in which there never would be. You could send an innocent person to prison if you were mentally retarded or, a psychopath. So even if you wouldn't, just say yes, Your Honor, because that's what they want to hear. That's the answer they're looking for. And the abolitionists and Free Soil Party politicians in the 1850s, they obtained greater and greater levels of sympathy from Northerners. And they wouldn't have obtained those greater and greater levels of sympathy criticizing the system from outside the system as anarchists or agorists. Greater and greater sympathy only arose because those people were participating in the existing system and saying, I'm a part of the existing system, and our existing system is morally wrong. It's morally wrong because it returns fugitive slaves back to death or imprisonment or slavery. So Charles Allen was one of Lysander Spooner's bosses at the law firm. He was an elected Free Soil legislator, a congressman from 1848 onward for the next 4 years, and maybe longer. Maybe he got reelected as well a couple more times. But John Davis was a U.S. senator that was the head of the law firm that Lysander Spooner worked for from 1835 to 1840, and from 1845 to 1853 he was a U.S. senator, and in between that time he was governor. So he had a lot to say. He could encourage people to vote not guilty in fugitive slave cases. And once the northern prosecutors and judges had teamed up and tried to kick abolitionists off jury members by questioning them before they were seated, that process is called voir dire, V-O-I-R-D-I-R-E. It's an illegitimate, unconstitutional process, and that still is how they send nonviolent drug offenders to prison. So abolitionists could pretend to be in favor of the fugitive slave law. When the judge said, could you send a slave back to slavery? They would say, yes, Your Honor, because they knew that's what the judge wanted to hear. They would pretend to be conformists, and then they would just vote not guilty anyway. And that is 100% of the freedom. That is the reason why Western civilization is different from Sharia law. That is the reason why we're different from North Korea, where there's no trial by jury, and the state pronounces you guilty and then murders you, or sends you to a forced labor camp to be murdered more slowly and cruelly. So that's the difference. That is Western civilization. Western civilization can be summed up by saying it's the right of the juror, the right of the jury member, to vote not guilty in defiance of the law. It's your right to protect civil disobedience using the jury. So the jury is all of Western civilization, and elections are almost none of it. But really, elections are a part of it because they're viewed as legitimizing to the system by the existing voters, and they're also viewed as rightfully as a means, even amongst pure anarchists, elections are a means of measuring how corrupt the system is. How dedicated and committed is the system to controlling the outcome of elections? Because I guarantee you the state of Colorado did not want to legalize marijuana in 2012. The governor was against it, but the people were for it. If the elections were rigged, then they would have had the election come really close to legalizing marijuana, but gee, it just fell short by that much. Oh, gee, shucks, try again next time, guys. It cost well over $300,000 to place that initiative on the ballot and to successfully advertise it. It cost a lot of money for the people who put the legalization initiative on the ballot, and it costs a lot of money in every state. And these are heroic people trying to do this. We shouldn't waste their efforts by not voting. And we shouldn't waste their efforts by assuming that no such people exist like that in our state. Now, if you're in a state that has fake initiative and referenda, like Illinois, then yeah, you should go out and you should vote for whatever state legislator says that the initiative process is fake and that it needs to be given teeth, and that we need to vote against every politician that's against the initiative and referenda process because they're against the right to self-determination for the state and local levels and for the level of the individual jury member. So we need to vote against every politician that's in favor of voir dire, of the pretrial questioning process, because it turns out that has no legitimate historical component to it. So even if you're a Republican, if you believe in a constitutional republic, the pretrial questioning process is not legitimate. And if you're a Democrat, it's also not legitimate. That's how they send nonviolent, victimless non-criminals to prison for nonviolent so-called drug offenses that are really non-crimes. So vote for state legislators who oppose voir dire. Vote for state legislators who run on a platform of restoring jury independence. And don't vote for anyone who opposes jury independence. And